for the March, let's see, sorry, paging through this, for the January 27th, 2025 meeting. Do we have any comments?
There's a typo, I believe, on page 4 of 72 in the second paragraph. I think they're trying to spell the word meeting. So I just think it's a typo.
Meeting. Yeah.
Are we moving with the approval of the agenda, or are we on the approval of minutes now? I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
Yes, you are correct. I'm sorry about that.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Member Ray?
Yes.
Member Perry?
Yes.
Member Grocott?
Yes.
Vice Chair Angelides?
Yes.
Chair Hubbard?
Yes,
Motion carries.
All right.
thank you. Okay, so
Are we-
item 2 is audience comments. Do we have any comment cards? Okay. Now we'll move on to approval of minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from January 27th as corrected.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Member Grocott?
Yes.
Member Perry?
Yes.
Member Ray?
Yes.
Vice Chair Angelides?
Yes.
Chair Hubbard?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, we have, let's see here, action item 4A, election of officers for the 2025 to 2026 cycle. Any comment before we get to that?
Okay. I'll make a motion that we maintain current status of the board with Member Hubbard as the chair and Member Angelides as the vice chair.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Member Grocott?
Yes.
Member Perry?
Yes.
Member Ray?
Yes.
Vice Chair Angelides?
Yes.
Chair Hubbard?
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you. And for the next item, we need to adjourn as the planning board and reconvene as the local planning agency. This is a ordinance 2025-10. Do we have any public comment on this? No. Okay. So are you leading this, Brandon?
We have Philip De Maria with Kimley Horn present to talk about this. He has been our consultant. We've worked with him for a couple years now and ready to move it forward if the board agrees.
Thank you, board members. Once again, for the record, my name is Philip De Maria. I'm a certified planner with Kimley Horn. Like Brandon mentioned, Mr. Barry mentioned, we've been working with staff closely this past few years on the sign ordinance. We've had a few workshops in front of you. I see some familiar faces. Some unfamiliar, so I'll take a moment to just briefly cover maybe what the purpose of the sign ordinance update was when we first started, and kind of where we are today and where it is in front of you. So first off, you have an existing sign ordinance, and that's Division 26 of the Land Development Code. And we've performed an update with our primary goals being quality of life and organization update, really looking at how it's used by both members of the public as well as folks who, like your staff members who use it for a means of regulating what occurs here in the city. And then a secondary, but certainly not less important, goal of the sign ordinance update was to make sure that we're complying with case law, like Reed versus Gilbert. The town of Gilbert is a town in Arizona, and it set a precedent for the types of language and information displayed on signs as it related to free speech and other constitutional needs. One overarching goal as well was, there was a comprehensive plan update performed, and one of the items identified within was also to reduce sign pollution and improve the look and quality of signage in St. Pete Beach as just an overarching policy goal as it relates to sign ordinance updates. You'll see that trickles through this proposal and strike through an underline that's before you today as a way to promote high-quality signage through revisions to quantity, size, design of regulations. But what we'll dive into here shortly, first and foremost, was recognizing that there are a ton of sign districts within the city of St. Pete Beach. For a town of your size, each zoning district had its own regulation, and so there was a real opportunity to consolidate and just make a little bit more concise an approach to signage, especially as it moves north and south on Gulf Boulevard. So speaking of which, this is what your zoning districts look like today, and there are 15 categories. Each zone district had its own sign code effectively within the zone district. And you can see on the left side of Gulf Boulevard or the west side may look different than the east side, and what that resulted in were different types of signs, different sizes of signs. So there's just a general lack of consistency here. Additionally, there were just slight differences between some of the sign groups. So for instance, your RLM, RU monument sign category had a maximum height of 6 feet, maximum area of 18 feet. DCRRM signs had you could go 2 feet higher, and you could get 6 additional square feet more of sign area, but didn't really result in any huge material changes. So there was just higher signs and locations, some larger signs and locations, but no real reason or rationale for it. Other than that, the zone districts were different. So I'll dive into quality of life and organization, some of the goals that we attempted to achieve in this update. Were updated regulations for non-conforming signs, improving standards for electronic and LED signs, temporary signs and window signs, provisions for inspection of maintenance of signs, allowance for pole signs if it's in a landscaped area, so including some landscape requirements at the base of these pole signs, implementing general sign requirements based on best practices in adjacent communities. That means material and design compatibility, modern specific sign standards, and clarifies artwork versus painted wall signs. You see a lot of that in Pinellas County. So just some precedent codes that we worked in and looked at, both for inspiration as well as to see how we measured up here in St. Pete Beach, where the town of Longboat Key, Manatee and Sarasota County, the city of Dunedin, Pinellas County, as well as the city of St. Pete Beach, just to see how folks are approaching signage in their communities. And then I spoke to this briefly earlier on the previous slides, but simplifying permitted signs and standards by zone districts through grouping them together. So you'll see new charts within the sign ordinance that simplify that. So we'll start off with the legal non-conforming signs. So non-conforming status, that basically just means that signs were lawful before new regulations but don't meet current ones, are considered non-conforming. So right now in the existing text, there is no non-conforming signs except for electronic and LED signs, which must conform or be removed by January 1st, 2027. And so we're not changing that. You see the electronic signs deadline at the bottom of this. That standard is maintained. But we did include some language or modified some language to include mandatory removal or replacement of signs. So if a sign is severely damaged, that means that repair costs 25% or more of the replacement cost as assessed. Or if the sign is assigned to a building where there's significant improvements costing 50% or more to the building, then they must upgrade those signs to make sure that they comply with current sign standards. And those are some best practices that we see in other communities. We want to encourage the maintenance of signs, even if they're not necessarily conforming. So you'll see in the text as well some allowed maintenance for those non-conforming signs without any structural alterations. Once again, just a best practice. As it relates to electronic and LED signs, this is a really common sign type or something that we're just starting to see pop up across communities. They're very popular with new businesses. You can change what signs say as often as you like. You can display different messages, sales, what have you. So we're seeing more and more of these signs pop up. You may notice them in your community as well as others that you visited. So there are current standards within the code. We talked about the conformity by January 1st, 2027. Cannot be more than 32 square feet of the total allowable sign area. No animated or flashing illumination permitted. Only permitted in a front yard or front building facade and cannot be closer than 10 feet from the front property line. And only permitted along Gulf Boulevard from 75th to 37th. The key here and issues that we identified were some differing views. This is from some of the community feedback that we held, both with chamber members as well as members of the community. As well as some of the planning board and commission when we brought this to them. So there are differing views on this type of signage, whether or not it was preferred or not, differing views on amortization, whether it should be maintained or amended. As I discussed, we'll be maintaining the legality of this and the requirement for conformity by January 1st, 2027. And then needing to decide if geography or standards should change. And those were just all things that came up as part of feedback. So the proposed standards, just in summary, is that they'll only be allowed for non-residential properties along Gulf Boulevard from 75th to 37th, so that was maintained. Must be in the front yard at least 10 feet from the property line. The design must be an integral part of a freestanding sign with a cabinet design matching the primary sign structure. So the idea is just that the quality of the sign and how it connects to the properties and the buildings that it's providing signage for, there's some relationship between them, which is, once again, a best practice. The size piece cannot exceed 50% of the freestanding signs area, maxing out at 32 square feet. So ensuring that we don't have huge message boards up and down Gulf Boulevard. We've assigned some brightness and timing pieces. So brightness cannot surpass 0.3 foot candles above ambient light at 50 feet distance. I'm not a light specialist, but this continually came up in some of the codes that we looked at. Timing messages must remain fixed for at least 1 minute. Static images, default mechanism, and then permitted signs. The static images and the default mechanism are clearly some best practices. Once again, I won't spend too much time on these, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. They're fairly logical in terms of why you would include them in a code. Temporary signs was another piece that we spent some time on, and I was really happy to have some assistance from the city attorney on this one. This is one where some of the Reed versus Gilbert case started to come into play as it relates to temporary signs. So you can see the strike-through underline taken directly from the text here. But temporary signage speaks to whether or not they're on residential properties or non-residential properties, has nothing to necessarily do with what they're advertising. So one temporary sign per property. On residential properties, not more than 3 square feet. On non-residential, it could be 12 square feet. Unlimited temporary signs are allowed on non-residential and residential 30 days before an election until 2 days after the election. Temporary signs for predictable events can be posted no more than 7 days before and must be removed 2 days after. For unpredictable events, they must be removed 2 days after. And then exemption does not exist to signs governed by a special event permit. So if you have a special event permit, you can still include signage within that permit that might not be regulated or have to comply with these. Window signs was another a hot topic as it relates to the sign code. So altering the definition slightly so that it states that windows and door signs mean any sign visible from the exterior of a building. Because a lot of folks were using window signs as a way to advertise their goods, but not necessarily having to comply with some of the sign codes. So some folks saw it as maybe a loophole of sorts. So we're very clearly addressing this. And then making sure that permanent window signs must not cover more than 50% of the window and comply with all fire safety codes. That's more of like a general urban planning theory piece where you still want there to be some relationship between the outside of the building and the inside of the building. Making sure that there's a maximum percentage ensures that there's that relationship is maintained. as far as measurement's concerned, the route that we took here was to make sure that they were permitted, but they count towards the maximum allowable attached sign area. So it's almost as if they're outside the building. If there were an attached sign on the facade, those count towards the same maximum areas. And there's some standards for temporary window signs as well. Those, I think when we think of temporary window signs, we think of like a for rent sign or something along those lines in an apartment window or something along those lines. Inspection and maintenance. These are kind of best practices. I won't spend too much time on these, but generally speaking, we want signs and their supporting structures to be maintained safe, neat, and clean appearance, and there's some standards associated with that. Hopefully that'll help out Brandon and his staff with code enforcement, those sorts of things. All right, here's some examples of the electronic and LED signs that you may see around town. We thought it was, we had some good pictures of signs malfunctioning without the default mechanism to turn the display off. You can see that in the top right of your screen, as well as in the bottom left as well. That also showcase, right, again, once again, there's a maximum amount of area that these, maximum amount of area that they can exist on a sign, and they're supposed to be secondary to advertising the business itself, which should be on the main sign that you see in each of these examples. Okay, so that was a lot of text. I think this one is one of the, I'll say, good quality of life changes that we're including in here, and that's consolidation of the zone districts. So you'll see the tables within the text. This results in a consolidation. This table that you see here is consolidating AC, BR, CC1, CC2, CG1, CG2, INS, and ROR districts, which all of these effectively have a very, very similar character. Different uses, certainly on the zoning side, different setbacks, sure, but generally speaking, these are, districts that are very commercial in nature, and the types of signs that were permitted and their sizes and the number of them were all relatively similar, so we consolidated them. This is for the BHC, LR, and RFM districts. One other thing in this table, and we think this will improve the readability of this code, is that it's very simple. If you're a business, you look at this and you understand that, okay, I have a freestanding sign. I'm allowed 1 per street frontage, not to exceed a maximum of 2. You read on the left side when you can go up to 2 signs, and then you're allowed to go up to 3 signs where you have a certain amount of frontage as well. You have your attached signs, your projecting signs, so you can kind of mix and match. You have a menu as it relates to signage. And then maximum area and maximum height play a factor here as well. It's TC1, TC2, UBV, CRDEA. Some of those other districts. As it relates to Reed versus Gilbert, once again, emphasis on content neutral regulations. That's key in all of this. The lack of censorship or regulation of viewpoints and signage and messaging. And then the sign code updates only pertain to the dimensional standards or signage within the city of St. Pete Beach. So once again, nothing to do with the commercial content itself. So we did a thorough review, and this sign ordinance that you see in front of you complies, from our perspective, with the Reed versus Gilbert precedent. These are examples of the changes made to ensure that there's compliance. And we're open and available for any questions, unless, Brandon, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Nothing.
But it's been a pleasure working with city staff. We've, over the last month, we spent a lot of time together getting this draft before you today. So we'd welcome any questions or any suggestions that you might have. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. I noticed that there were some changes about billboards. I was trying to get some background, or what was the intent of what was going on with the billboards.
Sure.
Yeah, I noticed that too. It was deleted from the definitions. As far as I know, there's only one billboard in St. Pete Beach, though, right? Over by the scooter rental place.
Is that the one on top of the pizza?
Yeah, yeah. I can't think of another one.
Yeah, I think, do you want to speak?
I think the basis for that was because, and we currently do this through our code as well, we do prohibit billboards through other regulations. We prohibit rooftop signage, we prohibit signage over, in this case, it'll be a 60 square feet. So we have other regulations that prohibit them without needing to call them out as a separate sign type.
Okay. Okay.
Great question.
And I had some other questions throughout the ordinance, so how do you want to approach that? Just
Go ahead.
fire away.
Right ahead.
Okay. All right, so one of the things I noticed, there was a lot in here, in purpose and intent, it had the size and everything, and it said that we were trying to regulate the appearance and design of signs so they complement natural surroundings, based on our reliance on our natural surroundings. So as I was looking at some of the definitions, the first definition that I looked at was artwork. And if you're looking in your packet, that's 15 of 72. And would you please bring up my question?
Ryan, can you please do the overhead?
Okay, so this is a sign thing that I took out of a CUP. And I don't know if you can see it or not, but on that first picture, if we can blow that up, where on the second story down below, you can't read it, but it says, can you read it? Yeah, it says it's artwork. No, up one. Up. See the block? That block, if you can blow that block up. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I believe that's the same as the rendering.
Right, it is.
Oh, St. Pete Beach art installation?
This is an art installation. And if you look at it, the picture below, what it is it's St. Pete Beach on a concrete wall. So I was thinking that maybe as part of the artwork definition, where it says it does not in any way identify a business product, business logo, or commercial message, that maybe we should add the word location, because I do not, what I'm seeing here is that if I declare this artwork, I can bypass all these sign regulations. And to me, this looks more like a billboard than a piece of art.
I think, I'd be happy to note that concern. I understand where you're coming from, and I don't know if staff or the city attorney has a...
I see that as more like a mural, like something you might see in downtown St. Pete.
Yeah,
stating the city.
It's
but
cold, it's industrial,
Yeah.
it's not consistent with our desire to go with our natural surroundings. I mean, if it was a bunch of turtles or, something else, I think it would have a totally different feel. But to me, it's a sign.
So would you suggest any writing be stricken from artwork?
Well, I know they're talking about content, that's why I just,
Yeah.
on the artwork definition, I was adding the word location.
So you're asking them not to put St. Pete Beach?
Yes, because it's a billboard. There's no art there, there's nothing referencing our, as it says here in our purpose, that complements the natural surroundings in recognition of this city's reliance on its natural surroundings and beautification efforts. I don't find that consistent with our natural surroundings. I find it as a way to get around the sign ordinance.
Can I ask a question on that one? So if we were, say, in historic Paso Grill and there was a mural on the side of a building and it depicted historic Paso Grill and said historic Paso Grill, would that be an issue? I don't see that as an issue.
Right.
I guess personally, I don't see that as an issue if it's, again, a rendering of.
Well, I guess what is here is there's no, and I have a definition of art. Can you put up the, I went to my trusted friend Google, and, okay, so obviously art encompasses a wide range, creative expression, visual, et cetera. And so I think if you were doing Pass the Grill and you had some kind of, I don't know, magnolias, turtles, whatever, I think that would be different. This is just cold, plain words on concrete. And I just feel like it's a way to bypass the sign ordinance.
So it sounds like the issue isn't the verbiage necessarily, the language on the sign. It's the block lettering. It's no different than the design of the building itself in many of these cup situations that we've had discrepancies with, with the community and saying it's not within the,
It's not the character of
it's not the character because it's industrial. So isn't that part of more of the process of the review process of construction and signage to ensure it meets the character of our community? I just don't know how you would
What if the letters were made out of palm trees?
Yeah, I just don't know how you would specifically say location as being a prohibited practice, because I think there's cases where you could make it completely within the character of a community.
Well, I'm certainly open to wording to make it clearer. What I don't want to see, though, is something get passed that anybody can write whatever words they want and call it artwork, and it's really not artwork. So I don't know the best way to prevent that, but I don't believe this St. Pete Beach plastered on the side of concrete is artwork. And it is definitely not in character with the beach. So I'm open to whatever wording anybody can suggest. I just don't want to see an easy workaround to get aside of the ordinance.
And I think I'll just add, your point's well taken. Obviously, our scope of work was primarily focusing on the sign ordinance itself. So the only thing I would add, or something to think about, this board should think about, is do we want to classify that lettering as a sign? Then that would be something that we would have to take a look at as far as if the location would apply to a sign code.
So the only legal trouble with content neutrality is, the way to think of content neutrality under Reed versus Gilbert is to say, if I have to read the words to determine whether it's in compliance or not, then that's not content neutral. So for example, I don't know if you've seen the sign like that says love, and it's like an art sign, or peace, If you have to read peace, love, or St. Pete Beach, then you're reading the words to determine whether it's in compliance or not. So that would be the trouble there. If you have to read the words to determine are they describing a location or an emotion, then that would be content based, and that would be unconstitutional.
Right.
So I don't know, Brandon, do we have an art review board in the city of St. Pete Beach that reviews art?
We don't.
Some cities have art review boards.
We don't have an art review board. This would be something that'd be handled at the administrative level, but I think that maybe independent of the text or the content on the wall, it might relate more to some of the design and material standards that the city has, especially for that overlay. That might be something I feel would be better handled through amendments to that rather than the content. I understand your concern is just about the word St. Pete Beach.
Well, it's not only, this is an example, but if people can do this and declare anything art and bypass our sign ordinance, I mean, that's the bigger issue. This is an example.
My question for city attorney would be, is the fact that I have to read it to know it says St. Pete Beach and not Tradewinds, does that make it not art?
It makes it content-based, which makes it unconstitutional.
Would this prohibit that being installed as written? Or it's allowable as art?
identifies a business product or business logo unless you consider St. Pete Beach a product or some commercial message. It does say, or a commercial message. I know, for example, in Naples, they have a postcard on the side of a building, but they asked them to take the words off it. So it would just be the postcard of the image of the old-timey cars going down Fifth Avenue.
Mm. I can't
Does this
personally.
lean more into what could be maybe a artwork standards ordinance?
Yeah, maybe we could have some criteria under artwork definition, ABC, what
Yeah.
constitutes art, what constitutes advertising.
Yeah, that's where I put the word location, was under the artwork definition, because there are places where artwork is talked about, and I
Yeah.
thought, that might
That
be,
might work. I could take a look at it some more.
okay, I would think that would be
I understand what
important.
you're trying to get to,
Right.
and I understand the concern on the other side too.
And if you put the original picture back up again, I saw something else that looked like it was not compliant, and that is at the very top of the building, it says trade winds, and when, in the chart that you put up, it said something about not going up more than two stories, or I have to find that chart.
In the proposed ordinance,
Yes, in the proposed ordinance, nothing's supposed to be higher than 2 stories, I
this
thought.
is the, which district? This is large?
This is large resort.
Large
And again, I'm just picking up examples of,
So, a current example, I mean, not off of a proposal, if you look at the brand-new Hilton Garden Inn, drove past it coming in, and I mean, that's a brand-new building, and at the top of their building, it says Hilton Garden, and it's
Exactly.
tasteful, it's their,
Right,
it's their local,
right.
but it's 5 stories up. So under this, does that mean they will need to take that new Hilton Garden Inn sign off of the 5th floor of their building?
Are the height requirements more towards
Maybe we
freestanding
can ask the
signs?
consultant in table 2617B.
Correct.
That covers the LR district. For the first question, it says, at the bottom row, 3rd column over, shall not appear above the 2nd floor of building.
That's correct.
So I guess the first question was, is trade winds one? I guess that's already been approved, but under the proposed sign ordinance, would that then be prohibited because it's too high up?
That's correct.
Okay.
So-
And your question was which one?
So Hilton Garden Inn right now, the new, it was just recently redone, is on the top, very typical, I think, to put it at the top of your building. One, for visibility as people are driving down the street and trying to see which building they're getting to, but, so that would need to come down
Is that large resort also?
it's within that district, yes.
Okay.
I mean,
That
it
would be
might be
some-
right before large resort, but in the new grouping it is. So when would those new signs need to come down by?
There's no requirement for, unless, well, I could flip back to the pages where there's, if there's damage to the building or
Okay, so
damage to the
unless it
sign
becomes
itself.
unserviceable.
Mm.
Okay.
I personally find that more attractive than yet another
I do too.
Yeah.
big sign 10 feet off the highway.
I agree with you. I think that having them at that, again, when I'm driving down the street and trying to see hotel, which hotel I'm going to, I think if it's tasteful, it's new, I don't have an issue with it.
I think any sign within the size and brightness requirements should be allowed on the structure itself, because it's not, it's not like a 6-story high freestanding sign. It's on the facade, so I think that should be
Yeah,
allowed.
And if we're limiting square footage,
Yeah.
there's going to be a point where they can't make it large enough, depending on how set back it is, so they're going to come up with something that works, but
How do you determine the square footage of lettering? Is each sign an individual, if it's individual letters, is each letter an individual sign?
yeah, it's a good point.
Would they
if
be
it's not-
limited to 2 letters then?
I thought
Right,
it was
so-
based on the side of the facade that they had to,
That's correct. So it's street frontage, gives you a certain linear amount of feet, and then it's 1 square foot, in certain zone districts, 1 square foot per linear foot of building frontage.
But it was a maximum of how many signs?
yeah, there's
3?
It's one per frontage.
There's 1 per frontage with a maximum of 2 to 3 per business. So is each individual letter, if it's its own letter, a sign? And would 2 letters, see, there's a lot of this that's just not clearly defined.
Sure. Yeah, actual measurements. We have current graphics within your sign code that speaks to how they're measured. I can flip to that in a second, but I just wanted to get clarity on some of the feedback that we're receiving today. So one is the maximum height. The planning board would would like to strike the maximum height of 2 stories and permit at the roof line, below the roof line, something along those lines.
I think below the roof line is
Yeah.
an appropriate one for a couple of
Okay.
reasons. You don't want that light, if it's backlit, you don't want that going over onto the beach side, certainly. And two, it's tacky, but
Yeah.
I think on a building facade, I don't think that there should be a second story.
Yeah,
You agree?
I agree with you.
So you don't think there should be a second story limit?
Limit.
Yeah,
Okay.
on the facade of a large building, yeah.
Shall not appear above the roof line, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
For Member Ray, I think the fact that we're limiting the quantity of signs would prevent someone from calling each letter a unique sign because they could only have
They
2
can
or
only
3
have,
letters.
yeah, so many.
But that's my point, right? If it's, would the sign then have to be, would all the letters have to be attached to each other?
Just-
Where's section, I know there's a section
Sure.
that's stricken through just below the definitions,
That's correct.
where you had a measurement, what has that been replaced with? Where it says how to measure sign area, and that's been stricken.
Yeah, we have
On
some,
page 9 of 39, it has in here that if there was individual letters, you go to the outside of the letters, but was that
Exactly.
replaced?
we have substitute graphics that aren't included in this draft, but there's a substitute graphic that we'd be substituting that, and it's the same measurement type, so for the purposes of discussion, the outside of the letters of any word would be the method of measurement.
Yeah. So Member Ray, to your point, if someone had 200 linear feet of frontage and they wanted to attach signs right next to one another, that might be an option, but they would be forgoing any other kind of signage on their property.
Entire
So,
property, yeah.
correct. Right.
Mhm.
What about signs that are interior to the property?
Those don't count as long as they're not visible from outside, from the public right of way.
Okay, so we have a couple points of clarification that we need. Okay, the next thing I had was under 26.9 or 4. It's on page 22 of 72, and it's in paragraph B, and it says, where a sign is erected, if I can read this here, such that any sign, display, or device allowed under this division may contain, in lieu of any other copy, any otherwise lawful message. And I was looking for the definition of lawful message, because I know you're not supposed to read the content, but what if somebody does something, that's really not appropriate? How does that get addressed?
So, City Attorney, correct me if I'm wrong, but we can still differentiate between commercial and non-commercial messages. So using a non-commercial sign as a way to allow for commercial signage wouldn't be allowed, for example. There are also certain items that can't be displayed lawfully on public signage, obscenities and things like that, the state, for example, reserves the right to use words like stop in red lettering and things like that. Those are unlawful messages that we can still prohibit.
Okay, so there doesn't need to be a definition, then it's understood what that means.
It might be a good idea to add that in, but I just wanted to give an example of what we're talking about when we say that. We can add a definition.
Okay, thank you. On that same page, 22 of 72, it says sign permit required, and letter A1, it says, under generally, the very first sentence, allowed temporary and allowed permanent signs of the type described in section 26.25 shall be exempt. I think in the new document, it's 26.13,
Thank you.
and so I think this is just an error.
What page is that on again?
22 of 72, and it's the middle of the page.
And what section?
It says 26 dot and then 5, sign permit required, A generally, and then the 1, allowed temporary and allowed permanent signs of the type described in section 26.25, but I really think that's 26.13. So maybe I don't have that right, but,
Exempt signs.
Yeah, that reference will be updated. That's right, 26.13 as well as.
and I thought I might have had a couple other of those as well, but might be just good to check them all. I know it's very confusing, especially when you're doing the track changes.
1.3 and 1.7 are the changes. Yep. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Does beach frontage count as road frontage for the multiple signage?
No, and that's under definitions on page,
Okay.
the definition, it's the fourth page of the strike through and underline where it talks about frontage building. It's a single facade of a building or portion of a building occupied by an office building enterprise, which is abutting a street, parking area, or other means of customer access, such as an arcade, mall, or walkway. Now, we do allow for a waterfront sign for those waterfront-based businesses. That's an expansion from what we currently allow. In the distant past, we used to have businesses that were only visible from a waterway. We don't have any of those now, but we do still extend the ability for waterfront businesses to have one sign on that waterfront.
Okay. So if a large hotel wanted to put, like the Tradewinds has on the front of their building, the Tradewinds along that top, could they put that on the back as well, facing the beach, or would that be prohibited?
They would be allowed one for that business because it's a water-facing business, yes, but it couldn't be eliminated. There's other limitations.
Right,
on-
because of the turtles and
Right.
everything. Okay, makes sense.
Is this written in a way that would be compatible with a zoning lot consolidation? So even though it might be 5 businesses,
Mhm.
one sign?
Right, Philip, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we were going to add some language in just to deal with those multi-business properties where it's a consolidation, not what you would see with a shopping center, but when you have multiple businesses on one property, just to limit the total linear footage of signage that could be put up, even if you have businesses, multiple businesses within a 200 or 300-foot range.
Mhm.
If that didn't make it in there, that is something we're going to look at,
Okay.
so.
Okay, on page 30 of 72,
Different.
at the top of the page, I think it's just a typo.
Which section number?
Okay.
My page numbers are different than yours.
Oh, I see. Okay.
30, 72.
I have 39 pages. I don't know where you're getting 72, but
It's 18 of 39 if you're looking at
Yeah,
the
it's
page
18 of
numbers on the
39.
redacted one,
okay.
or on the revision markup.
Go ahead, I'm sorry for the interruption.
No problem. So basically, it reads, "Numbers shall be at least 3 inches in height if the dwelling or business establishment," and I thought it should say, "is to be located 50 feet or less from the curb." So I just thought the 2B words might need to be in there.
Well, I think with referring to existing structures, it can just be is located.
Okay.
Oh, at the very top of the page there, I
Yeah.
see. That's in 2613A.
I'm sorry.
This is for street address signs, right?
Yes, it says, "If the dwelling or business establishment is to be located 50 feet or less from the curb or improved right-of-way." And I thought the 2B needed to be in there, but maybe it doesn't. It's just grammatical.
Rather than is located, you're saying is to be located. I understand. Well, hey, at least I know you went through this with a fine-tooth comb.
I think we're okay with is there. That would capture
Okay.
like applications that are coming forward. You're thinking, oh, this doesn't exist yet, but it's their application. So typically, we just use the word is and stay away from the passive to be.
Okay, all right. Okay, the next thing I had, I would need the last sheet put up. It's number 8. No, that's not the one, I'm sorry. It's that one, okay. This one, I know you're going to ask me what section it's in. It would be on 26 of 39. And it has to do with waterside identification signs. And it's specifically about the sandwich boards. And that's not on that one. Let me see if I've got another page for it.
26.18,
Yes.
section
It
3.
would be, it's also on page 27 of 39. It's boat or beach concession signs. And then it goes, that's letter G, and it goes on to boat or beach concession signs is on page 26 of 39, and it flips over to 27.
Okay, so the code reference is section 26.18, standards for specific signs, G3.
G. Yes, that's exactly right. So when I was looking at this, I had a couple of questions. The very first one talks about setbacks 40 feet from the water's edge. And I know the water's edge moves, and most of the stuff that I see talks about either a mean high tide or wet sand or something. So I didn't know if that was just a known meaning and I just didn't know what it was, or if that isn't the best way to describe it.
That's the way we use it as well, so it would be cleaner to be consistent with the rest of the code and use mean high water line.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay, the other thing I noticed is that the first 3 has to do with building frontage adjacent to the sandy beach. The second one has to do with a tiki hut. And then the third one's if you don't have anything. And it looked inconsistent to me because, for example, if I don't have anything, I don't have to have any setback from the water line. I mean, the requirements seem to change. And talking about leaving stuff on the beach at night, I didn't know. I know a lot from the beach ordinance that they are concerned about leaving structures out in the sand where the turtles are trying to come in. So this section to me was not consistent for each of the categories, and I also was concerned about compliance with the beach ordinance.
Yeah, I think this might be in conflict with our proposed beach ordinance.
These are good comments. I did want to say that this was just brought forward wholesale from our current code. This is what is currently adopted, and it was just moved in. But there are opportunities to make it more consistent with more recent amendments, so we'll make those changes.
Would this apply to boats that are docked, like at Dolphin Marina, where they have boats that are out there? They put launch times, things of that sort, and they set it on the dock?
So this would only apply to those few properties that are in the RFM district, so it wouldn't apply to any of the marinas. This would apply primarily to the Don Cesar and a few of our other properties at the northern end, so.
So this is like chair rental,
Correct.
that sort of business.
So to me, this just needed to be made consistent and cleaned up a little bit.
Great comment. We'll make those changes.
Okay. Okay, I think I can stop there. I have a couple more things, but they're minor.
Chair, what are you? I'd like to listen.
I don't have anything. I assume, like,
Terry does.
oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if we start back at the top, 26.1, and we talk about purpose, intent, and scope, and it says enhancing visual and environment of the city, promoting its continued well-being. We do not say anything about wildlife protection, and I don't know if that was purposeful or not, and nor do I see anything throughout the entire content with any reference to wildlife protection, specifically sea turtle lighting requirements or anything like that. Is that all because it's contained in other parts of code?
No, we can add it.
I think it's addressed in the building code, but yeah, it wouldn't hurt to add it here.
So a sign would fall under lighting if it was beach facing,
Yes.
and then the lighting ordinance is applicable?
Correct.
Okay.
And same, because I think some of these signs on the poles can go high enough that it may or may not go over a building.
Yeah, if it's a single-story
It's-
structure and it's a
yeah.
two-story sign, yeah.
So even if it's not, yeah, if you want to make sure that that's, and then we just talk about the fact that, that in there. On 26-2, when it talks about abandoned and describes that, and then again, when it talks about having, I think, 90 days to remove from abandoned buildings signage, does that include post-natural and/or man-made disasters, i.e. hurricane, fire, et cetera, Are we, at that point, mandating business owners, et cetera, have signs off their buildings within 90 days?
Where are you looking at?
So it's under definitions, I think. at 20
Page 2 of 39,
It's
26.2.
abandoned, yeah, 26-2, it talks about abandoned as being a period of 90 consecutive days or longer, but it doesn't talk about anything that has to do with, again, due to a hurricane or fire or some reason like that that would cause a building to be abandoned that may be out of the owner's control.
That's not currently exempted the way that we exempt certain types of use, you know, what would otherwise be use prohibitions. That would need to be something that we would amend in if it's something the board's looking for.
So under this, if a building was abandoned for a hurricane, currently, we would require that sign to be down within 90 days.
Correct.
That-
Based on this, yes.
I think that's,
Could we just define that abandoned does not include uninhabitable due to storm event or similar?
We could if that's the
I
board's
mean, 'cause I
direction.
think you're taking away their only
Yeah.
opportunity to advertise the fact that they will be, you know, that their intent is to rebuild if we, and putting a burden on them that they're already facing.
I would ask that we maybe tie it to a local state of emergency rather than just keep it open for
Right.
interpretation if that's acceptable, so.
Are the emergency ordinances that have been passed, would they interrupt this from being enforced? So maybe it's a non-issue?
Well, with our amended code, it would get, for any event moving forward, it would give that option,
Okay.
so.
So are we not going to make any change or add any wording to this specifically?
I think we'd want to limit it to while rebuilding due to a hurricane during a local state of emergency. So that if a business simply shutters
Yeah.
and it's not there, they should take their sign down
Right.
after 90 days. Otherwise, we have abandoned storefronts with all the abandoned signs in it.
Yeah.
Right. No, I absolutely understand the intent and agree with it. I just worry about, like I said, post-natural disaster, state of emergency
So
situations.
while we're on that, could I add that, so in some of these sections where there are no banners, wouldn't that be an opportunity to effectively put a banner up over the existing sign? There are, I think this ordinance, the changes to the ordinance impact small businesses disproportionately compared to the larger businesses on the beach. The trade winds is definitely going to be able to afford to do what they need to do, but the smaller businesses are going to have a much more difficult time keeping up with these things. We looked at a sign to move on one of the buildings down here, and it was almost $11,000 just in costs to get the design and the engineering designs out. And most of the small businesses, that's cost prohibitive to some of these small businesses. So, and I'll let you go back, but those are some of the problems that I have with what we're doing.
So you're saying, so your recommendation would be like, if the sign became unserviceable because the state of emergency, business owner should be able to put up a temporary.
Well, I would say something like a temporary, we'll be back, or, because we're looking at, right now, we're discussing an abandoned
Right.
business or building, right? So if there was a way to, how do you, do they have to file with the city to say, we're not abandoned, we're waiting for permits?
So defining abandoned.
I think the abandoned, but it does define, that's actually
Right.
what it
You're saying
defines.
the problem is it doesn't
Clearly,
talk about.
it doesn't allow for, what if it's just listed for sale for 90 days? Is that abandoned? There's no activity going on it, it's an empty building?
Well, I think 90 days set makes it abandoned, is what
It would
what it
be
says
30
currently, which is
90
my
consecutive
concern,
days.
because
I think
clearly
90
we have businesses that are,
I think it's too restrictive. But we also have to put limits on it, so where's the balance is the issue?
So you want some kind of temporary banner allowance?
Well, I don't know if it's a temporary banner allowance, but if we're considering a building
Yeah.
abandoned because there's been no activity there in 90 days, and they have to take down their sign because of that,
Yeah.
there are businesses that are waiting for
Yeah.
permits to be able to fix their buildings, so.
I think the ongoing permit should allow them to be,
Well,
to keep the status that there is intent to fix the sign, so that, yeah, I think wording for that would,
And then if you
Yeah.
put something in there as an actively listed rental
Yeah.
or, for lease or whatever, then you also have those guys who could just actively list it at no cost forever. So, yeah, there's a,
yeah.
well, that's why, yeah, I'd like to, I was thinking of tying it to natural disaster.
Yeah, state
so
of
that
emergency.
we don't get caught between those folks that are just trying to bypass, again, an ordinance and just not take their signs down versus someone who's actually trying to get back to, but are dealing with permits, are dealing with
Yeah.
FEMA reimbursements, are dealing with a whole litany of things that we know our businesses are dealing with, especially some of the small businesses. To your point, the smaller businesses are really waiting for SBA loans, et cetera, et cetera. How do we protect them from additional burdens and costs and citations through this ordinance?
sure.
Another option would be to tie it to the declaration of state of emergency, but those can tend to go on for years. We're still under the Hurricane Ian, for example. That was 2.5 years ago. So just to run this by the board, we could tie it to a local state of emergency, which we do have control over. It sounds like the board would also be amenable to, if a building permit has been obtained in a certain amount of time for storm restoration, they would be able to maintain the sign for the length of the restoration permit as long as it's kept in good standing with the city. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there a sign at the grocery store that's no longer there? I mean, would that have to be taken down?
Winn-Dixie?
Yeah, is it a Winn-Dixie? I thought it was a cash and carry, but yeah, it was Winn-Dixie, you're right.
I don't remember.
I mean, I think there's a sign there that's blank. Would they be required to take the structure down? Would they be required to take the wording down?
It's been a few years, but I believe we did take them for a variance. A few years ago, we went through this, possibly even with Hurricane Ian, and I remember they had to go through that process. So it was them and a few other businesses. And if you're referring to the one on the west side of what was formerly the Winn-Dixie, they have removed that sign.
Have they?
Yes.
Section 26.3 applicability. Section C3, it says historic markers for local. I assume that means official historic markers, not like when you drive down and you hit the Don there, it says like, there's a sign there and it says home of historic Hasbro or home of historic Don Hazar or whatever it says. But you mean official historical markers in that.
Historic markers for local, state, or nationally designated historical resources.
Just want to make sure that people don't, again, get around it. Talked about 26.6. Yeah, 26 tax 6E is where it talks about removed within 90 days of the effective date that we just talked about. 2611, signs on public lands, item F. And that talks about anything that's on publicly zoned land. And I'm trying to decipher if temporary signs falls within that or outside of that, where we have real estate open house, handyman services, all of the, just like I said, drive in and you see them everywhere. That's public land. So does this prohibit all of those regardless of timelines?
It does, just like it does today. The one exception is when, for example, we have the banner for the Gulf Beaches School right over the bridge. We do allow for that because that's something that we took action to allow.
Okay.
So.
Section 2612B, window signs. I think I wrote this over here too. So does that include when you are driving by any of the like local gas stations and they're plastered with the, your 6-pack of beer costs this much, your big gulp costs this much, your this and this, and you can't see anything but like the various crazy signs, so that limits those signs.
It is, and that is currently the adopted standard. I know our code enforcement's out from time to time addressing those situations, so.
Okay, thanks, I just want
I think there was a slide in the presentation that showed that.
And then, I think on 2613, and it's, and that just came up when you talked about, during the presentation, we talked about signs on residential, multifamily residential. So if I have a condominium and every one of those is independent and each one of those, 12 of those are for rent, each one of those can have a sign in their front window saying for rent, as it's currently written.
I'm sorry, this is
I think it was
2613L.
26.
Would be a temporary sign?
It was under temporary signs, and it was under your presentation, that's what made me.
Temporary window signs and temporary signs.
Yeah, it says each
element.
multifamily unit, that's what I'm asking, is can each unit in a multifamily dwelling post a sign in their window? Because that could get really,
I think so, the way it's written.
not sure how the other folks in that.
Sometimes in the multifamily condominiums and apartment buildings, they have their own internal declaration of restrictions and rules about what you could post in there.
Okay,
We
but
are
as it
trying-
stands,
we are
that's.
trying to allow, a person that lives in a condo to put, for example, a freedom of speech sign in their window, whether it's to vote for a person or express some political idea or.
Which, yeah, brings me
Yeah,
over to the
typically.
same 2613M. And I'm just not sure how folks feel about this, but a resident can have an unlimited number of temporary signs for approximately 32 days on their property during voting period.
It's because they may want to have like, if there's state officials, you might have a candidate for the state house, candidate for the state senate, candidate for governor, candidate for city council, candidate for county commission. You see during the election times, some people are, I guess, really into the election and they want to pick someone that they're voting for and everything. Other people maybe just pick one candidate or two candidates.
So,
This is to allow,
And so
allow
does
them
that
enough
sign
speech.
specifically have to be for a candidate?
No. You could say peace, freedom.
So they can put unlimited number of signs for 32
You're not-
days around any election, and it doesn't have to refer to a candidate?
You're not
Because I
allowed.
can find elections all the time, I assume.
You're not allowed to regulate the content, so you can't say you can only post governor signs or city council signs or local election signs or national signs. You have to,
So
if someone wants to put any kind of freedom of expression, stop the war, they're allowed to put that up during an election period. It doesn't have to have a candidate's name.
what are you defining an election period as, I guess, then? Because
Any
otherwise I'm
official.
gonna say,
Official election that takes place in the city.
okay, is that defined
Includes
under
a
the
national
definitions?
or state, well, anytime we have precincts here running an election.
Okay. So then
Like,
I
make
would
sure
just like
it's
to
in the
define that,
definition,
because
yeah.
otherwise, again, you're just opening it up to say, well, there's an election in Missouri, locally, and I'm from Missouri, and so I wanna put this sign
Yeah,
that's
let's
nothing
put
to do with it.
election
Well,
definition.
and
in here.
we do say an election event held within the city, that is part of the temporary sign.
Okay.
Can I jump in on that same number?
Okay, I just want to, make sure, especially once we start not saying anything, it doesn't even have to do with the election. What is a wind sign? Can I ask that question on prohibited to 2614?
Sorry, 26.
14E, what is a wind sign?
The wind sign means a sign which uses objects or material fastened in such a manner as to move upon being subjected to the pressure or to pressure by wind.
Oh, yeah, that gets
Shall
that.
include pennants, ribbons, spinners, streamers, or captive balloons. However, the term wind sign shall not include flags.
Okay, I think that was it, we addressed the second story. And then, again, being District 4, I'm a little concerned regarding no specific historic limitations for the Passive-Roll overlay action area.
Yeah, I thought also there might be something we could do for exempting certain historic external signs that have a history, that specific sign replacing
Or, well, again, I mean,
theater sign on Quarry Avenue,
I mean,
that kind of thing.
even new signage that doesn't require any characteristic, and I mean,
Oh, review
the
by-
eyesore of the, stop and go sign, which is the very first corner, is a perfect example of, the lack of conformity with the character of a historic overlay district. So to not have the historic overlay district kind of called out separately, I consider a concern.
Typically, would they go to the Historic Review Board only if they were asking for a variance, or is it part of their site plan
Not
approvals?
typically unless it's part of a new development, and currently we have specific standards for the overlay, as Mr. De Maria mentioned, but it's only a limitation on illumination. We don't have material or any other kind of standards. We could look into something, but it may be a little outside the scope of this at this time, but it's definitely something we can work on as staff. We are amending the Paso Grill overlay district in the CRD 8th Avenue, so that's something we can maybe look at bringing back in tandem with that.
So then maybe like shall not detract from the historical character
Yes,
and significance of the particular historic district,
that would be.
contributing structures.
Who would decide that, though? Unless we have a formal committee,
Well, they have historical.
but they don't have the authority to
Yeah.
do that currently.
You could send them through the Historical Review Board if you wanted to.
That sounds like a good option.
Or
Are
'Cause in-
businesses required to conform with the aesthetic completely, though?
Not currently.
Yeah, it seems a little,
That's why. I'm
Unless
trying
it's
to
a
push
historic
that,
building.
because
Yeah.
we're living through exactly that of
Yeah.
them not with some of these businesses coming in that we want to try to.
yeah.
When this had initially been taken to workshop, there hadn't been a lot of interest from what I perceived for there to be internal consistency or consistency between signs and buildings. I think where we did make a recommendation, and that was accepted, was having landscaping around freestanding signs. We're allowing pole signs based on what's drafted here, but it would require it to be set within landscaping instead of in the middle of a parking lot, or at least get some kind of aesthetic benefit out of that. But I think was that the perception you had at the
That's
time?
correct. Yeah, it's consistent. I was going to say we could, as it relates to the Paso Grill area and CRDA, perhaps makes sense just under the table 2617C, have a second note and just say that they're subject to additional standards as set forth in the overlay district.
That's great, thank you. So, no comments, thank you.
Sure. Should we consider maximum widths in any of the districts for residential, for example? Because if you're allowed 24 square feet, you could have a 1 foot tall, 24 foot wide sign.
I think
And-
residential is limited, isn't it limited to 3 square feet?
It's 24 square feet for a freestanding sign.
I think you're looking at page 25 of 39
I'm
of
worried
the table.
about the
Correct.
long, thin sign possibility.
Yeah, because sometimes people try to spell something out in multiple signs, and then you're, instead of paying attention to driving, you're paying attention to what is this spelling as I drive by. And
So I will say that
The vermicelli sign.
yeah.
So I will say, especially for the standalone residential districts, the core residential and even the downtown residential, which allows some very limited commercial, those are specific to businesses. I don't believe we have any businesses that are currently non-conforming, but that would apply if we were to ever get some kind of a assisted living facility or a facility like that. They would be limited, but it wouldn't be for a typical residence. It would just be in those specific examples.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
So I just want to make sure I heard you right, Brendan. It's for commercial buildings or commercial use buildings in a residential neighborhood.
Correct.
Okay. But a resident is still limited on a sign in their yard to 3 feet.
That is correct.
Okay.
So I wouldn't
We
be
want
allowed
to
to
maybe
put-
want to make that, make sure that's clear here. In 2617, D. permitted for commercial uses in the residential R1, R2.
One thing I'd just like to draw your attention to as well, the graphics that I mentioned, as well as the method for measurement, is located at 2615, which speaks to the 2615C.
Area calculation?
Area calculation. I think maybe C3 might be the,
Okay.
like, directly apply. Yep.
You put the graphic in there?
Correct.
Okay.
Should there be some kind of ratio restriction?
As it relates to both height and width, like we
Yeah.
were just discussing.
Yeah.
That'd be at the will of the board if there's desire for that.
That would work.
Because if it's
Um,
60 square feet on a large commercial project, maybe you could make it.
1 by 60.
That'd be something else. So maybe a maximum of.
It's also something we could do some research on and
Yeah.
come back with maybe some suggestions.
Okay.
I have one more, David.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, on page 19 of 39, letter M, you were talking, Terry, about the temporary signs, but there's, before number 1, in that paragraph, it says, "Signs may be freestanding or attached wall signs and shall not be of a type prohibited in section 26.13 temporary signs." But 26.13 are exempt signs. So it's just another one of those
Okay.
cross-references.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Can I, a couple questions. Do we know how many businesses would be required to completely replace signs at this point? Also because of the 25%? Is it all of them?
No.
Okay.
No, it's not. We had a surprisingly few number of destroyed signs in the last storm. There were a few on Gulf Boulevard we're working through. I'd say maybe 4 or 5 were just completely dismantled and need to be replaced based on our current 50% limitation. The 25% is intentional. We did lower that to address signs during more blue sky periods, to make sure that they eventually do need to come into compliance. It's currently 50%, and you can do a lot with the 50% of the value of the sign when it comes to just general maintenance. So we did intentionally lower that to 25% to accelerate compliance with the sign code.
And I get that. I think timing might be bad with the burden that's been put on small businesses from the storms. I think that should be taken into consideration during this time. I'll come back to my question in regards to the ability to be able to use banners. What do we do, or how can businesses that have seasonal offerings offer those if they're not able to make changes or put different signs up?
Well, currently, and what's proposed under this code is effectively the same as regards to banners. We allow them for transitional periods when a sign is conforming, and it just needs to be, it's an alternative to a sign sock or another way to show a business before they get a permanent placard for their sign.
Was there a time limit on that?
Just during the interim period, but it needs to be on an existing sign. It just can't be a, freestanding element on the property. We also allow them for a month when a business is under grand opening. We allow that as well.
So if I had a quarterly promotion, I could quarterly change my sign with a banner?
It would be in association with a new business tax receipt. That's what we tie it to. So when a business locates into a space, we issue a business tax receipt that gives 30 days.
But that would be just for grand opening, not a seasonal change?
That's correct.
Okay.
We would have to amend something in to allow that.
I guess kind of my question or comment really is that, sorry, I'm trying to find it on the page. Under, it is page 1 of 39, A, says to encourage the effective use of signs as a means of communication in the city. And I think a lot of the things that we're doing is actually limiting businesses the ability to be able to communicate. And I think a lot of what we have here isn't defined clearly enough, in my opinion, to be able to make a decision for approval or disapproval at this point.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
And I did want to say there are a few additional permissions that we're extending to businesses. For example, currently we pretty heavily restrict those businesses that are allowed to have a sandwich board sign. We are extending that to any business, so now they now have that changeable sign copy. It's not expensive. It's something that almost every business owner could take advantage of.
But there were restrictions on it from where they could put it, right? So if you were on
Right.
Corey, you probably could, would you be able to put one on Corey?
There'd be limitations, especially if those businesses built at the property line. That would be difficult, yes.
So what do we do for a business that's built at the property line and ordinance would actually have them put their sign 10 feet into their building?
They would be, well, and we would restrict electronic message board signs on Corey regardless.
Yeah, electronic boards, I'm not even, I mean,
So they would meet the 10, but they'd probably be limited to an attached sign or a blade sign, so.
If they're at the property line, though, they probably have windows they could use signage on.
maybe. But there's also restrictions on that, 50% of the window.
Right.
Would you have see-through, you know what I'm talking about, the signage that you can see through?
Mm-hmm.
How does that affect it? If I had a hole every other inch, is that 50% if it covers the entire window?
Or like a wrap?
Yeah, the wraps that are see-through.
Something we'd have to take a look at, but generally speaking, if it,
I'm a business owner. I'm going to figure out a way to get around whatever I can get around. And I'm not trying to do it to, look, my concern is that businesses are struggling right now, and we're putting an ordinance on them, or we're suggesting an ordinance that I think makes it more restrictive for businesses to promote their business. And we find this at a time when we know that they're struggling. I think in the end, what our goal is to clean up the city and make it look better. But if you make it to the point where businesses can't generate enough business to stay in business, it's detrimental to what we're trying to accomplish, in my opinion.
To your point on timing, knowing that there is this in the works, how are you addressing the businesses that are just coming out of their hurricane and putting new signage up? Are you somehow going to grandfather them, or are you giving them guidance to say, this is what we recommend because this is where we are recommending the code go? I mean, I would hate to see a lot of businesses come out of this and say like, oh great, we're in with the existing code and here we go. We've just spent thousands of dollars putting our signs up. And now, 4 months from now, they're out of
Or worse, they spent thousands of dollars for the engineering to put the sign up, and then we changed the code.
right. So how would we address that interim period, knowing that there's more than normal businesses that are in the process of upgrading and redoing signs?
Mm-hmm. So for the two sign, surprisingly, we have not seen that many come through. I know that there are going to be a few coming down the pipe, but I have tried to give them information about the upcoming sign code. But again, we don't know at this point what's going to be adopted. I will say that both signs that I approved met the current code, and they will meet the code if it's adopted as drafted, so they're in the clear.
Brandon, have you had any discussions about is it House Bill 102, the radius of Hurricane Ian and more burdensome codes. I don't know if that might give some.
So there is currently legislation, just like with Hurricane Ian, where there was a moratorium placed on code amendments. It's unclear if it's going to affect us here, but if it gets passed, there's a good chance, just because we were so heavily affected. I believe that's what you were discussing. So we were bringing this more for guidance. We were looking for a recommendation, but it sounds like there are some changes that we need to make, and we can take this feedback and move forward. But I do want to especially address the storm recovery provisions or potential suspensions. We do have different ways of addressing that. For example, we're currently suspending through resolution some parts of our code, not related to signage, but it gives the ability for property owners to renovate on Sundays, for example, or move forward with other elements of restoration. So are you looking for permanently greater permission for potentially temporary signage, or loosening restrictions on the substantial or the damage regulations?
I mean, that's a discussion that I think you have to look at. I don't know. I'm not asking for either of them. I'm looking, I apologize. And I'm always the guy that says, don't bring me problems, bring me resolutions. I have no resolutions for you. I just brought you problems.
Sure. That's fine.
Is that House bill written in a way that's retroactive to the day of the storm, like the last one was?
Yes. And it only covers regulations or plan amendments that are more restrictive or burdensome.
Same language as last
Some
time.
of the language we have in here is not more restrictive or burdensome. It's kind of either the same or less restrictive.
Mm.
So those could go forward.
Okay.
For example, the sandwich board signs.
So anything, the portions of this ordinance that are less restrictive could move forward, but those that aren't would have to roll back to what it was before?
If the bill passes, would be stricken.
Would be stricken.
Yeah.
So that 50% would
We don't
remain.
know if it's going to pass. It's still in committees and all that stuff right now, and it can change as we're going forward, so we're not sure.
Okay.
So now we kind of just keep doing our business as usual, and then if it happens, then
Deal
we'll
with
review
it
it at that time.
Okay.
But that might be helpful as you go forward, Brandon, and Kimley Horn, if you keep in mind what's allowed now and which provisions are more restrictive and which are less restrictive, so we can identify them, and in the future, make it easier. And there'll probably be similar questions at City Council. Is this more restrictive than what we allow now, or less restrictive for the different tables and things that we have? And some may be the same, just explained differently or put in table format.
That's a good recommendation.
I would like to get some degree of consensus from the board, though, particularly as it relates to banners, because we are currently so prohibitive on the use of those. Is that something that the planning board is open to, either during storm periods, in the wake of storm periods, or potentially used as transitional signage between occupants of a building? Would the board like us to come back with language that addresses that?
Well, certainly from a transitional standpoint, if you have someone who took over the Winn-Dixie and the sign was there, I think a banner sign could be put in place until, if a permit was applied for, maybe. We're putting in a new sign, and we put up a banner sign in the meantime. But I also think during this storm, it's an extremely cost-effective way for these businesses who don't have signs to be able to advertise. I would like to see something that allows it during these times. Now, of course, then you have to set the standards for the banners at that point, right?
And I would think with that, we would probably limit them to the same square footage as what they would be entitled to with an attached sign. I think that's so.
I think fixed banners should be allowed, but they would have to be secured in a way where they don't flap around, or it says here, balloons and pennants. I don't know. I think we can make a more restricted definition of a banner. What comes to mind to me is the Indian Bistro at Dolphin Village had a kind of canvas sign that
Right.
was held up with string that was on the facade that was secured. They might still have it. I don't know if they changed it or put a sign up, but I think that sort of thing is acceptable.
Okay.
And, you know, while they're waiting for a new sign or building the inside.
I think the requirement for securing it is really important. Again, hurricane season
Yeah.
one lasts a while here.
And it's
so
windy,
you
even-
don't need a bunch
yeah.
of signs flying around out there either, so.
So do we need do you need a permit to put a flagpole up?
Yes.
And you can have up to 3 flagpoles per property?
Is it 3?
I think it said 3 flagpoles. And then could my flag say whatever I wanted my flag to say?
I think it's 1 flagpole, 3 flags, I believe.
That's what I'm.
Yes, we don't regulate, again, it's for, I think we can differentiate between commercial and non-commercial messages, but if someone wanted to fly the United States flag or a, peace flag or whatever they like to do, I believe that's permitted.
Does it define that it can't have a commercial message?
Flags containing a commercial message shall be part of the computation of the allowable area for freestanding signs. So they would still be able to have it, but it would count against their maximum.
So did that answer your question, or do you?
Well, and once we're done with the discussion, I did just want to go through the recommendations from the board to make sure I captured everything, because we would, when we bring this back, you can absolutely disagree with what we drafted, but we do just want to make sure we captured everything, so we at least have the framework for a successful ordinance. I know there's some ambiguity and questions in how we address some of these things, but I just want to make sure I got all the points. So,
I don't have anything else.
anyone else?
Anyone else?
Okay.
Yep.
I'll just start at the top. Looking at freestanding signs, a limit for multi-tenant developments, talking about businesses when they occupy the same frontage of a property that's been consolidated. How do we address that? Potentially look at artwork, or if it doesn't work within this ordinance, possibly bring back other amendments to our code that look more at design and location context for signage. Let's see, the board is okay with signs being above the second story, keep them below the roof line, add definition or a better description for what a lawful message is. There were a few corrections related to references, using mean high water line instead of water's edge for setbacks, including requiring nightly removal of sandwich boards, regardless of whether the sandwich board is associated with a beach business or not. That needs to, and all of that language needs to be made consistent with the beach ordinance as drafted. Add turtle protection to section 26.1, general environmental protections, which I believe is consistent with our ordinance, so we could definitely bring that in. Dealing with abandonment of signs, waiver of the abandonment requirements when there is a local state of emergency and when the occupant has an active building permit for performing restoration work. Making sure that there's additional signage requirements to be consistent with the Pass-A-Grille overlay, even if we don't currently have restrictions within the overlay, alluding to that so they could be amended in the future, and setting forth additional standards for the 8th Avenue overlay district as well. Make it clear in sections 26.17D that residences are not allowed attached in freestanding signs that are listed in that table. Look into including a maximum width or aspect for signs in section 26.17, so signs can't be overly wide. Again, more corrections, and looking for banner signs to be allowed when a building permit has been applied for new signage during those transitional periods, or when a sign's coming down, allow a banner temporarily while the new signage is under review. Those would be fixed banners, so they would not be able to be strung up or be wind signs. They could be attached to the facade of the building. Potentially also look at tying allowance for banners to a state of emergency, so they would be able to be used during emergency periods. Those were the major items I wrote down. Did you capture anything else?
The only thing that I'd ask for, that's consistent with mine, Brandon, the only thing I'd ask for consistency on is we primarily spoke to the maximum height not being above the, or being permitted above the second story within the large resort district. I just wanted clarity if that would apply to all districts where we have a maximum signage height, because that is one that would obviously have some effect on design. So this would apply also to table 26.17A. We spoke about 17B. In 17C and D, there's a maximum height above the first floor.
I would personally think large resort and perhaps RFM, but the rest keep it as is.
Could you differentiate the two? Signs attached to a building as opposed to pole signs? Is that what we're...
And this is specific to attached signage. The way it's currently drafted, the resort districts, as you mentioned, they do not have that story limitation. The districts that allow for mixed use, where you would typically have 1 or 2 stories of commercial at the ground level and then residential or lodging above for the larger developments, they do have that limitation, keeping them at the second level. So I would, to be consistent, I believe 26.17B, there would be no height limitation. 26.17A would be permitted signage taller, as well as the TC 1 and 2 out of C. So we could just completely remove the limitation on height. We could just limit it to the height of the building. It of course can't be on the roof as directed, or we could limit it to we could effectively just bring in the current limitations from the code and apply those in the particular districts.
Should there be a distance off of the crest of the building as well? A maximum?
We could do that as well. I think our current language prohibits anything above any structural element of the roof. I'd have to look exactly how it's defined, but would you just, nothing above the eave line or parapet with language like that work?
Fascia.
The fascia, okay.
Because that would prevent, if a building had a more sloped roof, I don't think we'd want signs mounted to a sloped roof.
Sure, understood.
You could just say nothing on the roof,
Yeah.
right? Only...
Yeah, we'll take a look at some different options, but I think we've got the intent there.
Yeah. Was there anything that we missed in our summary?
Anything else?
All right, thank you.
Okay. We will adjourn as a local planning agency and
Need a motion before it?
No, we know to.
Yeah, it sounds like you're going to
Okay.
modify, bring it back.
Mhm.
Okay.
Is there anything else we need to take care of before we leave under discussion items?
I did just have one quick announcement. We have scheduled we had a successful engagement meeting for the kickoff of the comprehensive plan last week. We have scheduled the remainder of the meetings. We have one meeting before the planning board next meets, as well as one at the very beginning of May. The next meeting will be pertaining to the town center zoning districts, and that will be on April 17th. May 1st I got them in reverse. April 17th will be the large resort. May 1st will be the town center 1 and 2 land use categories. Those will both be held at the community center ballroom, rec center ballroom, and they will be at 6:30. So we'll be posting these on social media. We'll be sending out notices to those within our mailing radius, but I just wanted to make sure the board had those. And I know I stumbled over this a few times, so it's April 17th for the large resort district, May 1st for the town center districts, and that will be at 6:30 in the Recreation Center ballroom.
Okay. We should adjourn as a local planning agency first, right, before we have discussion items from the board?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay. We'll reconvene as the planning board. Is there any ongoing reporting that you get from the consultant as these meetings are held, so we can see what concerns were voiced before the next meetings occur?
We should be getting information in. I'll speak with our planner handling that. Would you like those reports as they come in?
That would be ideal, because, or if you receive public comment from people that aren't able to attend those meetings, we can perhaps voice those concerns for them or ask those questions, but also it would help to know what people are thinking as this process continues, so we can perhaps give thought to what they want to know or what they're concerned about, and come up with their own questions or concerns.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So Chair Hubbard, I did attend the last one, and it's all public comment, so I'll start by saying that. It's very much like they start with a phone poll and ask, what do you consider to be, your priority for the city? What would you like to see more of? What would you like to see less of? And then they broke out into basically panel boards had pictorial, large resort, residential, and just pictures of different types of construction, modern, Key West kind of style, and had people put dots on everything and just say so it's very interactive. And I just say that in capturing comments, the whole thing is comments. It's very interactive form that they're using, so it's interesting.
Yeah, we had one of those, I think the FDOT sponsored it. I feel like it was a year and a half ago, and then I never heard anything else on street ordinances and widening and narrowing. And so it would certainly be useful if we could hear what was coming out of it versus we'll send you a report in a couple of years. And
Well, I'll speak with our planner. We'll send over what we have.
Okay. Anything else? No? Okay. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all.